Welcome to Getting Better with Dr. Adam. Dr. Adam Silberstein is a clinical psychologist who has been working in the field since 1993. With a broad range of clinical experience, including state psychiatric hospitals, adolescent residential treatment with a trauma focus, the Department of Corrections, and in the addiction treatment arena. Adam is currently in private practice and serves as a clinical consultant and supervisor for a number of treatment centers. This podcast is for general information and entertainment purposes only. This should not be considered treatment advice, nor is it a substitute for an individual treatment plan. If you have questions or concerns about your individual situation, it is strongly recommended you consult a licensed professional to talk about things that are specific to you. If there is an emergency, it is strongly recommended you seek treatment at your nearest emergency room.
I just had a very interesting talk with Rabbi Dr. Mel Gottlieb. Rabbi Gottlieb, Dr. Gottlieb, is the president of the Academy for Jewish Religion. He lectures on Kabbalah, Hasidut, psycho-spiritual dimensions of the Bible, and has a wealth of experience both as a social worker, a therapist, as a rabbi, and has just served in many positions. I really... I mean, that's all great, but what I really like about talking to him is his way. Here I'm talking to someone who's clearly just a fountain of knowledge and just a wealth of information. But what's most revealing is how grounded and present and enlightened he is. You just speak to him, and for me at least, I've spoken to him many times. I just find myself focusing on what's important. And he walked us through how the search for meaning is inherent in all of us, and how there are various portals in the therapy experience and the life experience that we as providers and just as human beings, enlightened human beings on this planet could strive to pursue to help other people, and how he does that through various mythology and teachings that he's been exposed to. Hi there. I am pleased and excited. I have the honor of having Rabbi Dr. Mel Gottlieb with us today on this podcast, Getting Better with Dr. Adam. And I want to say before we start, I've got to know Rabbi Gottlieb over the years, and I've heard him speak a number of times. And what happens for me when I listen to you speak is it's like a Xanax. I just get really, really calm and centered quickly, right, into a place of my frenzy just quiets down, and I just feel like I'm listening to such a powerful message of depth and importance. So for me, once I started doing these interviews, I thought to myself, what an interesting potential guest, Rabbi Mel Gottlieb, who has his doctorate from Pacifica in depth psychology with a focus on Jungian, the history of Jungian psychology and so forth, and therapy practice, as well as being an ordained rabbi. So the message of depth that speaks to me has been how does one integrate the field of psychology and spirituality. So that's the preamble and to this discussion. Welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So I'll get a little focused here. How did you get into? I assume you became a rabbi first. So what happened for you that this interest in psychology? How did it unfold with your rabbinate?
Well, I think ever since I was a child, I was trying to figure out the nature of the world and human beings and how people grow and change. Part of it came from my early background. My mother died when I was young, and I was raised in an Orthodox family. However, the yeshiva that I studied in made a distinction between religious people and non-religious people, and that didn't fit my experience. I loved all people. Part of my family was not religious, and they were equal to people who were religious. So I began a quest, for the meaning of life and which traditions I experienced as true. When I was a young kid, about 8 years old, I went into the library, public library, Seward Park Library in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and I went to the philosophy section, and the librarian came over to me and said, "Son, you're not in the right section." And I said, "No, I am. I'm interested in these books here." So since I was a kid, I always sought truth. There was a famous poet, John Donne. He says, "On a huge hill, cragged and steep, truth stands, and he that will reach about must and about must go." So there's no absolute truth. It's a journey towards truth, and Jung speaks about the journey towards wholeness. I think the world is filled with mystery. We don't grasp the absolute truth, and the mystics say, the Kabbalists say, that's built into the creation, that God didn't want us to have absolute truth because that would lead to a complacency. So it's the striving towards truth where we keep yearning and growing and discovering the mystery, and then we create wholeness through that journey.
So if you're listening, right, don't be disappointed if your 8-year-old isn't in the library looking for philosophy books
Right.
to find out the truth of life.
Right.
Right. But
Yeah.
what's struck me is, do you have a belief that all humans have this innate yearning for search for truth?
Yes.
And that will never be filled in an absolute way?
Yes, that's put very well. We have psychologists like Viktor Frankl, who wrote a book, Man's Search for Meaning, Jung, for all the psychologists who study the human condition, no matter the way they conceptualize it. Some conceptualize the ego versus the self. The Jewish traditions calls it Yetzer Hara, an evil instinct and a good instinct, the Garden of Eden story. But they all struggle with the fact that human beings are not totally whole, but they have a conflict, and the resolution of this conflict creates meaning. And the great author Hermann Hesse, he wrote many books. One of my favorite books is Steppenwolf. It's about a university professor who in the evenings visits the bars, and he drinks. During the day, he seems to be very rational, but this instinctual part of the self comes out at night, and he searches for unity and between reason and emotions. And every time he thinks he finds unity, another polarity comes about. So he comes to the conclusion that the human condition is not really about finding or discovering an absolute unity, but we're like an onion skin. We peel off different layers, we discover more things, more depth as we go along, and we need to accept that, because the search for that and the illusion that we could find it leads to frustration and anger.
So this isn't a discussion, this internal conflict, whatever you want to say, good versus ego, good versus evil, ego versus self, that is an inherent conflict of tensions that exist no matter what my faith is or what my faith isn't.
Right.
Meaning I may be a person of no faith, right? But I'm trying to create resolution of some sort where I feel whole and in control, and now I finally get it and I've arrived.
Right, because you're born into a mystery. You're born against your will and you die against your will. And in the interim, you try to discover, what the hell am I doing here? And the East and the West have different ways of dealing with that. The Eastern traditions try to do away with the ego, so to speak, through meditation, just concentration, and they look at the mind as monkey chatter that really takes you away from that focus. The West, we try to integrate the ego with the self, with the higher self, with the soul. We can't do away with it, but it has to serve the self. Many people that just serve the ego, they chase after meaning in the wrong places, materialism, hedonism, and they don't really find that soul satisfaction. That really comes through a sense of giving, a sense of connection to nature, to something larger than the self.
So in that description you just did, this is important to me. I'm very invested in my own meditation practices. So the distinction between East and West, when you describe the ego, right, matters brain, matters thinking, matters appetites, versus the self, capital S self, right? Which is more of a whole, generous of spirit, connected, not so focused on appetites and satisfying of urges, right? In the West, it's about a reconciliation of the conflict between those two competing forces.
There's Jung said that a Westerner, because he made a big quest going to find the self, going to India and Asia, etc., and he came back with the conclusion that the Westerner should not find the solution in the East, because the Westerner is born into a materialism, wealth, and instinctual influences that will always be with him or her. So he or she just needs to integrate and sublimate it, utilize it in a quest for God, but not to deny it, because you're fighting against the natural part of the self, that the Westerner, it's more powerful than the Easterner, who goes, So
in your understanding of the Easterner, right, the process of meditation, of coming back into present moment awareness, I see the chatter, I come back into awareness, I see the chatter. How do you describe that in terms of spirit, in your version of this quest, this human condition?
So I'll express it in Jewish terms for you. There's different levels of soul, according to the Kabbalah and Hasidus, and the highest level is the neshama. So there are different levels, the ruach, nefesh, etc. The lower soul is the bodily soul that we have to master, our instincts, so it doesn't control us, but we're in control of it and utilize it as a way toward God as well, toward intimacy. When two people say to each other, "You're the one," then God dwells in between. Sexuality is a great blessing when it's used for intimacy. Then there's the higher soul, the ruach, which is the mind. We utilize the mind to discover God or to find an ethical way of being in the world, and that brings us closer to something beyond the ego. But even when we get to that level, we still can't connect to God unless, which we call the neshama, the higher level, unless we yield, we let go. We let go of that control, and we say, "Thy will be done," and then a space is opened up where God can enter. God cannot be controlled. That's just a limited level of quest, and many people remain on that level. They don't experience the higher self, what you call through meditation does that. The Hasidim say that the righteous of the ancient days would meditate an hour before the prayer service, pray, and not meditate an hour after the prayer service. You have to empty the mind. You have to concentrate. You have to have kavanah in order to dwell with God, or else you could be at the prayer service and just keep chattering and thinking about everything else, but connection, but slowing down and going on in nature, you could find it.
So it's not that it's a different type of access to connection, meditation, that isn't inherent in the architecture of Western culture.
Right. Well, it is. There are different manifestations, different ways to get there, to get to the journey toward God. One is through good deeds, and the others through meditation, prayer. The others through studying the Torah, the higher self, where the others synchronicity. Jung speaks about synchronicity when events happen beyond probability. The other's nature. Just the other day, I just had a mind-blowing synchronistic event. I was going hiking into Mescal Canyon with my wife and just going up there. And all of a sudden, I saw two people in conversation, and someone mentioned the name Naftali Mertz. And I looked up and I said, "Wow, Marlon Mertz was there." And she said, "Oh my God, we haven't seen each other in 20 years. Just yesterday, I was thinking of you, Mel." And I said, "How come?" She said, "Because I was with a friend who lives around the corner from you and described that her roommate died and a man named Mel went to the hospital to help this person because she had no friends. She was my dog walker who died, and she made me the medical permission, to let her go." So she said, "It's amazing. I'm meeting you today after you entered my consciousness yesterday, and I wanted to express gratitude to you through the universe, and here you are, because you did this mitzvah, this helping thing. And I was blown away by it. I said, there's a book called A Rumor of Angels. I always liked that title. Like, sometimes something happens that awakens you. The garden story, the snake in the garden. The snake gets a bad rap. But, in Greek mythology, it's Septemtia. It's the wisdom. The snake is very wise. So the story, according to the mystics, is that a snake, is an Ouroboros. It says it's round, so it's a symbol of the self. It's used as a caduceus, as a healing thing. If you go to a pharmacy, it sheds its skin, so from birth to life. It's a very powerful symbol. And also, it could surprise you and awaken you. When a Westerner goes to a Native American reservation, you see they play with snakes there. But if a Westerner comes, the snake wants to bite them because they bring anger and fear to it. It's a projection. But the snake can sneak up on you and awaken you immediately, like it's a rumor of angels,
So I hear someone who's walking through life looking for opportunity to find meaning, right? And sometimes if I'm awake, right? If I'm awake and mindful, I can be awake to things that would ordinarily trigger me, may have a connected meaning point, like the symbolic snake, or the fact that events that seemingly unrelated, all of a sudden you have the synchronistic moment and you find connection. And I'm talking to somebody who's finding connection and meaning in this way of what is the truth, since you're a child, and argues that all of us have this. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit, and I assume a lot of people listening to this are people who are, aspiring to be in some ways in the helping profession. And whether it's in recovery or in psychotherapy or psychiatry or medicine, and they're just interested in this, in matters of how do you help people. So here we are, a lot of us, we're in the world of contemporary pop psychology, right? I hear a lot of talk about trauma. I hear a lot of techniques that help people regulate, whether it's mindfulness, whether it's, what we call EMDR or brain spotting or neurofeedback. So there's a lot of techniques out there that are gaining popularity. And, as neuroscience builds, there's a lot of focus on how do we help people heal through those techniques. And here I'm speaking to someone who I'm guessing would advocate that part of the healing process is also the search for truth. Mm-hmm. So
search for meaning,
search for truth, search for meaning.
Yeah.
How does the psychologist in contemporary popular psychology, how do you integrate, what is this intersection of psychology, the practice, or mental health treatment, and spirituality?
So in my practice, many patients or clients are sent to me because they know I'm a rabbi and a psychologist. They figure I have some entry into their search for meaning or some crisis they have in meaning. Sometimes it's depression as a result of searching and coming up empty, etc. So I find that people are looking for meaning. If they can't find meaning, a neurosis, symptoms appear. Jung said that it occurs, the search for meaning occurs after 40 years old. The first 40 years is the ego is very strong and we want to make it in the world, and then all of a sudden we awaken because death appears and we want to find meaning. Why am I here and what will happen? The Kabbalists say the same thing, that you should only study Kabbalah after 40. In the Kabbalah, 40 is the number of ripening that the Jews were in the desert for 40 years. Moses went up to get the Torah for 40 years. There's a lot of 40s that something shifts within the self. So I don't remember the question, but
I'll help you. The question is how does the younger therapist, this intersection of treatment, right, and spirituality search for meaning.
Right.
How does it, in a world of techniques,
Right.
how does one begin to think about and integrate this?
Okay. So Martin Buber had this term, healing through meeting, MEETING, that when a therapist is really present with the patient, Otto Rank wrote about this too, there's an ontological betweenness that appears. In other words, when two people say to each other, "You are the one," then God dwells in between. I've had teachers, Marion Goodman and others, who said that before they do their therapy, they say, "Who's in the room with us?" They invite someone else into the room, meaning spirit, meaning healing can only come about when you feel held in totality, not just your symptoms and stuff, but I see you. I see the, quote, the image of God in you. Or mainly in Judaism, it's not only see you, I hear you. We say Shema Yisrael, because seeing can be distracting. Hearing, we quiet down the mind and we really listen to the person. And when that occurs, the person is free enough to be vulnerable enough and say, I'm helpless, I have no meaning, I can't find God, I can't find meaning in my relationships. So through that talking, through that listening, we help that search evolve, and the person feels closer, feels healer, more whole through that dialogue and through that encounter, even though he or she may not find the absolute truth, and the shadow reappears all the time. We can find it for a moment, that connection, but then we go out and once more we can be lost. But that too is the learning experience. Both the darkness and the light are part of the human condition that is informative. If we believe that life has a meaning, a purpose, it's always a discovery. What was my part in creating this darkness at the moment? I was angry at you, I cursed at you, and then I go back, I reflect, rather than being reactive, I observe, what was it within myself that was touched? So this bad experience becomes a learning experience. I become more conscious, and as I grow through life, more and more layers appear. And even though I don't tap into the absolute truth, because it's always evolving, I'm happier because I'm discovering. And I say, I went on a hike and this happened to me today. I'm meeting Adam, who's a beautiful soul, who gets me and I get him. We have a connection and we feel better, because we're connected. So not only an individual search, but a group search or a relational search can create meaning. When people go to synagogue, a lot of them don't really connect above, but they connect with a group who are buzzing, who are searching, and something happens, something is touched within the self, because we're more than the ego. There's something, when people speak about God, I don't always think about God out there. I think of the God within. What do I mean by that? When I'm motivated to do something good to another person, I call that the God within. Why the hell would I do that? There's something within me that's born. They once asked Gandhi, is God love? And Gandhi said, I'm not sure if God is love, if God is a mystery, but I know to love is God. When I see a person loving, something is touched within me that some people call God, So we're children of God in that sense. We have an image of God.
So powerful. Somebody walks in, this is regardless of what is attractive to the individual therapist, right? Whether I'm into cognitive psychology or I'm into depth psychology, right? There's something that you're saying that I think would be useful for any provider, whether you're a therapist or not, but, an internist, just meeting with somebody.
Right.
How do I tap in? How do I invite in myself an experience where I'm truly present and listening from a place of my soul, right? Or myself, or whatever you want to call it, that you would say is that generosity of spirit. How do I connect on that, from that place?
Okay, so there's not only one way. Any way can be a way as long as you make it a way. If you're in a meditation practice, that's one way. Relationship is another way. I was trained early in my life in social work, and we had this discussion always in the early years about how few people we can help if we just do individual therapy, individual practice. There's only a limited amount of people. So we have to create natural social networks where help can be found. You could go into a bar or a barber shop. If you have a person who's really present, that connects with you, that can be very healing. So relationship, I've been in therapy with many different therapists. The ones that really touched me were the ones who were truly present and were able to create an experience where I would become present. And as that happens, I discovered things within myself, which that I had to get through, pain and anger, etc. Then something lighter emerged, which some people call meaning or God. Meaning can come through many ways. It doesn't just come through connection with God. It's through our work, through our love. Freud said there's two things in life, love and work, that are essential. So if we have fulfilling work only, though, then we search for more. There's something within the self that needs more, that Frankl calls meaning, that Jung calls meaning, that Freud felt. Freud was strange. He felt you could feel whole just by successful work and successful love. And he felt that God, that's just a childish need and a projection because of a lack of meaning. But the way to find it is not through illusion, but through work. Jung felt that the imagination is essential for healing as well. In the Kabbalah, we have the intuitive mind and the rational mind. One without the other leads to a blockage. We need to utilize both to find truth. God cannot just be found in the rational. But on the other hand, if we're just in la-la land all the time without any connection to reality, we also don't really become centered. So the highest traditions try to integrate our work in the world, but to realize that there's something beyond the senses, beyond the rational mind, that we can experience in nature. Just a beautiful butterfly sitting with a large, in the, what do you call those trees? Up on Route 128 up there in the north, and a love relationship. Jung said, not only Jung, everyone, that when you're in love, you're mad. Meaning that you get beyond the rational mind. You're out of control at times. There's something else enters you. You call it God, call it love, call it spirit. And many traditions, they say, it only appears when you're on the verge of death. That the only time you find that absolute truth is when you cross over. Here it's a journey toward it. There's a lot of tales about this. One of the Jewish tales, there was a man named Rambam, Maimonides. He was a great sage in the 13th century. So one of his students was on the deathbed, and Maimonides said, when you cross over to the other side, I want you to come back to me in a dream and reveal to me why bad people flourish in this world, why bad things happen to good people, etc. And the student promised that he would. Sure enough, a few weeks later, he appeared to the Rambam in a dream. So the Rambam asked him, so Nu, what's the answer you get? So the student said, when I was on the other side, everything was so clear to me. I understood everything and truth and why things happen in this world. But when I crossed over, the challenge appeared again. It was fuzzy. I don't know. I can't answer it rationally. So that's what it is. Part of it is a trust, a faith. How do we develop that faith? It's through living life, through paying attention to the self and others, paying attention to nature, reading the classics, being alive, being in sports, being in a zone.
This is, so I'm picturing being a patient of yours, and part of what you're advocating is living, is taking an active role in being awake to your living. How does someone from your background look at symptoms?
Okay, so symptoms is just a symptom. You have to get to the core of why that symptom developed. So one of the ways to do that you just mentioned is, a patient, if you read Otto Rank, The Diary of Anais Nin, Volume 4, she comes from a Freudian to Rank. Rank worked with creative people, and she describes the experience, why it worked for her. And one was that Rank was so excited about everything she said. She said, seeing a human being as someone unique with a unique destiny, unique talent, when you believe in that in another person, it helps that person to see themselves differently. All therapeutic different modalities affirm that. The storytelling, make your story from victimhood to a heroic story, to, doing it with your mind. I like to work with the whole soul, with mind-blowing ideas that touch something even beyond that. But you look at the Bible, you could look, one of the courses I taught at Pacifica was a psycho-spiritual look at the Bible, putting a Jungian lens in the Bible. All these myths in the Bible are mind-blowing if you see them that way. Dreams. Where did Jung discover dreams? Look at the Bible. Jacob's dreams. Several dreams. I wrote an article on this. You could cite it for you another time. But Jacob's dreams. For example, one dream he lies down at night and he has stones that are put under his head, and then the stones become words, basically, because it's really letters. It's a symbol for letters that become words. The stones become houses in the dream. And he says at the end of the dream, I didn't know it, but I'm dwelling in the house of God. I was in the house of God. Meaning that, what I interpret it is, we have letters that are disparate. We have no meaning for our lives. Or then, at a certain point, they become words. You get when the unconscious is ready, you could put it together, the story of your life, etc. The story, and then you discover God, the house of God, the God within, without. But you have to be ready for it. There has to be building blocks. That's why they say 40, whatever. But I find that children are the most spiritual. They see things very straight before we ruin them. We inhibit them and all that. So the dream of Jacob and his ladder. Okay, the dream here is Jacob had a real conflict with his brother Esau. The last time he saw him, he stole a birthright from him, and he was a trickster, Jacob, and he was afraid after all these years that Esau would kill him. So he sent his family on one side of the river. He told them, I'm going off on a trip to the other side of the river. I'll be back. The name of the river was Yabok. Jacob's name was Yaakov, the same letters. So he kind of crossed over to the south. He went across the river. He had this dream, and the dream was he was wrestling with this angel, and the angel wounded him in his thigh. And as they were wrestling, the angel told him, no longer will you be called Jacob the trickster. Now you'll be called Israel, the one who wrestles with God and discovers God and transforms God. So the question is, firstly, why was he running away? It was out of fear. And why was he a liar and a trickster? Because you lie when you're afraid of something. So no longer would he be afraid. Now he'll be the one who's God connected, the one who struggles with God, or in Hebrew, the one who sings to God. Yisrael could be Sher El, or the one who does righteousness, Yasher El, in the world. So he was ready for it at that moment. He was no longer going to run away from. He was wounded in his thigh because the sages say that he no longer could run away. He had to face the self. He had to face his fears, face Esau. In therapy, when we unpack what the fears are, what the anxieties are, and we get to the roots of them, we can begin to have a dialogue with them, become conscious of them, gain more control of them, not repress them, not totally obviate them, but we recognize them. So our behavior is not just reactive, it's more reflective, and we discover meaning in that life changes as we make that interruption. Rather than me being angry at you, I reflect and I say, well, what did I bring to it, or why am I seeing it this way? It's still this thing from my past that I'm now more in touch with, so I could be more centered in my relationship. We had just one more thing. You mentioned a lot of therapy. There's Eugene Gendlin. I studied with him many years ago when I was in Boston, when I was the Hill director there at the time at MIT. So he did this bodily shift kind of exercise that we hold our pains in different parts. And if we get connected and you did a meditation, label it, and then go back to this feeling. Is this a feeling that you had earlier on? Label it again, and you felt the bodily shift, and you kind of released it. So different therapies find different ways to get back to earlier memories and what you carry, and how to liberate it in some way, how to reframe it. Yeah.
So it seems to me, in speaking to you, you use a wide range of sources, both psychology and teachings, Torah teachings,
Yes.
and teachings from everywhere, from the beauty of the butterfly story that you just saw to different Kabbalistic ideas. How do you use mythology in practice? How do you appreciate and inform the connection with your patients using mythology?
Well, since I'm well read in mythology, and some of the patients, for example, who are Jewish, who come in, they're familiar with some of the Jewish mythologies, and I reframe it in a psychological terms, and it's an aha experience for them. Let's say the Garden of Eden story. Many people think that the Hebrews sinned, Adam and Eve sinned, and they were evicted from the garden. But I explained to them from some of the Kabbalistic points of view, it was actually a blessing that they left the garden, because according to Freud and others, Freud terms it eros and thanatos. We have a death wish and a wish to grow. Thanatos is a death wish. To return to the garden is actually a death wish. You want to de-stress. I want to go to the Garden of Eden. I want to go to sleep. I don't want to face life. The reason, so I explained to them that this was built in. We have to go out on a journey and integrate the opposites. It's not a world of unity. The garden is the unity, but we have to leave the garden to face the duality and then return to the garden, not with naive consciousness, but with a holistic consciousness. Then we can come back. And I explained to them in the Jewish terms, the Hebrew alphabet. The Torah begins with a bet, the second letter of the alphabet, rather than Aleph, the first letter of the alphabet. Why is that? Aleph is a world of connotes unity, because this is not a world of unity. This is a world of bet. Unity is arur, it's a curse. Bet is bracha, is a blessing. And if you look at the shapes of the letters, Aleph is a letter of God. It's 2 yuds, and above 26 is yud hey vav hey. So there's a potential for unity at times, but we're evicted from the garden, and we make the bet, which is closed on 3 sides and open on the 4th side. Our job is to partner with God or fill in the world, which is not complete, and make it more whole. And that's bracha, that's a blessing. So the eviction from the garden is a blessing to journey, to discover the self, to bring it back in a holistic way. So when I tell a story like that, a myth, they awaken. They say, wow, I've been looking for unity all around. It's the wrong place. I should be accepting of the dark and the light and try to integrate it, find meaning in it, bring that light to the world. I want to help complete the world, but I don't want to go back to the garden. That was an escape, to go back to the garden. I was at Thanatos, So they awaken a little bit.
So I work a lot in the field of recovery
Yes.
and addiction. And as you're saying this, I'm thinking that the supreme fantasy of the addict is, I'm going to graduate and I'm going to get to check out. I'm going to get to be at this place where there's no discomfort, there's no exertion, there's no pain, and I just want to be comfortable so badly. How can I sustain endless comfort? And it's so, I don't want to have frustration. I don't want to have any disease, keyword disease. And I hear that, and I think of the population I work with, and there's so much pain and pain avoidance, and shame and guilt and I hear you talking, and I'm picturing what you would say to them, say to the individual who feels so badly, him or anybody feels so badly about life not working out, or the parts of me that I don't like. Ugh.
Right. So, that's a good point. And let's say in Freudian terms, Freud spoke about the pleasure principle and the reality principle. You're describing the pleasure principle, that there's a big energy within ourselves to de-stress, to find pleasure, to find a place of stasis. And in physics too, we have that. So, but that leads to death. That's a closed system. We need to.
That's like the Garden of Eden.
Right, exactly. So we have to allow the reality principle to look at life as it is and to learn to accept it, not to want to change it into this Garden of Eden all the time, and to endure some stress. There's a book written by Hans Selye called The Stress of Life. He talks about stress, eustress, and distress. Distress is too much stress. When talking about someone who's addicted, it's very painful, etc. It's hard to grow in that way. Eustress is no stress, just pure, everything is good all the time. And that also doesn't lead to growth. It leads to, but we all need a little bit of stress in our life that's healthy to motivate us to go on. So with someone who's really in pain, we have to listen to the pain. That helps to reduce it, not to take it away, not to give advice or reassurance, but just active listening. I hear you, I feel you, empathize, and let it play out. And it finds its way. It finds its limit.
So in the depth teachings, right, there's this idea of mirroring in some of the schools, right, where there's a real asset of value to me, the therapist, listening and attending in this way that you're describing to the patient's pain, and really being present in a reflection, right?
Right.
So there's an important use, or touched on this earlier, the importance of relationship. And I'll say this, every single person I've spoken to, pretty much, right, who comes in and talks, regardless of their background, the authentic connection between, provider and between patient or client it always gets touched upon, right? It's always going to be there. How do you understand that as a healing agent or not? The mirroring, the idea that I'm here, I'm therapist, and I'm truly present. How is that a healing agent?
In religious terms, it says the God within me meets the God within you, kind of. In other words, how do we see the light? There are a lot of metaphors between light and darkness, how either my light is going to raise you to a certain level or your darkness is going to bring me down to your level, but there's always an interaction between two souls. So if you yourself can reach a level of enlightenment, of light, of connection, that impacts someone whom you're with, and they notice that. Like we worship the wrong things in life. We worship wealth or someone who's absolutely brilliant. Rarely do we meet a spiritual person, who's centered and who transforms you. Because we're not even looking for it. But that's the key, I think, in therapy to in healing. To get away from your ego needs, but to be a vessel of soulfulness and to allow that other person to experience that with you, and they can discover that within themselves, that they're not just this shameful person. Shame, there's a book by Helen Merrill Lynn called Shame and the Search for Identity. Shame, and if you look at Erickson, the 8 stages, shame is lower than guilt. It's shame versus autonomy, etc. So shaming, it's important to really bring out what's the source of that shame, and to allow the person to move from a state of judgment to a state of acceptance and to revealing it. Because when we don't connect to what it is, when we're so ashamed that we can't even face it, the person is really stuck. So you have to accept the shame. And I want to hear more about it. Tell me about it. You could use your series, you could use humor, because some of it is so blocked up. Humor is healing too,
I'm a big believer in that. I think I'm very funny.
Yeah, you are.
Not everybody does. Yeah. No, I think I am. That's all that counts. But I do. No, I agree with you. And as you're speaking, I do a lot of training of associates and psychological assistants over the years. And a lot of them will come to the work of healing, not through the rabbinate like you, but through their own recovery. So they've been in 12-step programs and grappled with some sort of an eating disorder or substance use, amongst other things. And when they get to the place of being a provider, I say to them, and you spoke about sort of bringing light versus being pulled in by the darkness. I say to them, if you go to meetings, right, you have to double, right now, whatever you're doing, double it, because it's so hard to be the voice of wellness, right? And all of a sudden, I think I have something to say. I have to maintain a certain humility, and in this seat that I do, I have to do twice as much, right? Because I want to be that light, because otherwise I become the voice of I'm the supreme expert, and that compromises. Right? How can I be a light if my ego is telling me I'm great?
Right. You have to have humility, to be a healer. And you mentioned about humor. That's a very healing thing, because humor touches the unconscious. And it has to do with aggression, sexuality that people repress, and they're ashamed of. They hold it back. So when the comic touches it, it liberates them. They laugh because the tension is released. And it's healing. It's a beautiful thing. The same with stories. When you asked before about myth, what stories when I give a lecture, it's not so much that people remember the ideas, but they'll remember a tale that I told. It's because a story, I don't have a chance to get into Kabbalah with you, but it touches the part of the brain that's not always utilized, the imagination. The artist touches that more. So if I tell you a story about the Baal Shem Tov, you'll feel uplifted. Let's say a story about a Melamed, a teacher, who was very rational, and he was called upon by this wealthy person to teach his son a bar mitzvah lessons. But the person said, "But make sure you don't confuse him with ideas of Chassidut, of this illusionary tales, Baba Mises, So he said, "No, I won't." So this man, this teacher, one day had a dream. And he had a dream that he was wandering through the streets, and he passed this golden castle. And inside of the castle, he heard this teaching coming out of the castle. It was the most beautiful Torah he had ever heard. So he ran to the gate. He wanted to go in to hear it, but the gendarme, the officer, said, "No, you can't come in. This place is not for you." So he was depressed. He woke up in the middle of the night, and a little depressed. He went back to sleep, and in the morning, he remembered every part of the dream, the castle, what it looked like, the person when he sat down, except he couldn't remember the beautiful Torah that he heard that had touched his soul so high. So he was very frustrated. The Sabbath came, and on the other side of town, the Baal Shem Tov, this great master, he had this custom of teaching Torah in the afternoon between Mincha and Marav, and before he began to teach, he said to his gabbai, to his assistant, "I want you to fetch me the Melamed, the teacher." The gabbai was surprised because this Melamed was not a chassid, he was a rationalist. Why would the Baal Shem Tov ask? But the Baal Shem Tov asked. It was raining, he went through the streets about a mile to this big house. He knocked on the door. The Melamed, the teacher, actually answered the door, and he said, the gabbai said, "I've come for the Melamed." The Melamed did not know why, but he just threw on his coat and walked with him, with the gabbai, till they reached the temple of the Baal Shem Tov. And when they reached there, the Melamed heard the same teaching that he heard in his dream from the castle, the same teaching, and he became a chassid. Something awakened in him, the synchronicity, the touching of his mind that he knew was beyond probability. The same dream that he forgot, he hears from the Baal Shem Tov. So stories like this sometimes touch. Whatever, this may not be the best illustration of the story, but
I was riveted, and when I'm sitting here speaking to you and sort of reflecting on my own work, here's what I've arrived at. There are so many portals and entry points of how to reach someone, right? It could be through a story, and I may not be the type of guy who's filled with stories, but I'm funny, right?
Yeah.
And I may be a meditator. I may access somebody that way, and I may access someone through just being awake to the beauty, right? Or being awake to possibility. But I feel like I'm speaking to someone whose mission is, how do I help you access that portal that's going to help you access light? Right.
That's a good way of putting it. Everyone is unique. That's another famous story. When Zusha was dying, is on his deathbed, his students came to him and said, "What are you going to do when you get to heaven? And God will ask you, why were you not like Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, Jesus?" He said, "I'm more worried if I get to heaven, they ask me, why were you not Zusha?" That was his name. Why were you not yourself in this world? Everyone is unique in this world. And we have to allow that, honor that in the other, and allow it to empower the person. When they feel heard in that way, they feel strengthened, and they walk out until the next session.
So I'm gonna wind down with some charge.
Yes.
And I may be opening something up early, but
yes,
people may hear rabbi and go, fuck this guy, right? That means he believes this and this, and that means he believes this about this and this about us and that about them, us and them.
Right.
And here I'm speaking to someone who's I believe is radiating, I love everyone. Literally everyone is unique. Sins and all.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I mean, so how do you ever get because your title, just rabbi, is charged for some people, right? It's Jewish, it's teacher, it's guru, right? It's a lot.
Right. So
sorry to throw that at you at the end.
When I used to go to a party, and if someone said it's a rabbi, the whole room would change. I didn't want to be known that, that projection is...
You chose it.
Yeah. Well, maybe it chose me.
That's true.
But I've run away from it for a while. Like I've been a university professor, a therapist. To me, I've always had actually a conflict, the way you described, with the notion of the rabbi as the know-it-all and his way or her way is right. And that's not the way I experienced life. As I said, when I was younger, life was a challenge for me. I came from an Orthodox background. I didn't buy everything that they were teaching me, so I had to go off on a journey to discover it myself, what felt true for me. And many things in the Orthodox tradition are beautiful to me, but there are certain things that you alluded to is a problem. So
I'm not saying even Orthodox. I'm saying any religion, any statement of I am an expert at spirituality, and this is the path, and this is the path, and that's what gets conjured up for a lot of people. I say it because a lot of people work in 12-step, and the third step and the second step refer to God, and the people are like, I'm out.
Right. Well, that's why I started our discussion with saying that there's no absolute truth, that it's a journey towards truth. I don't represent truth. I want you to help you discover your truth. The most important statement in the Bible, the Talmud discusses this, which is the most important thing. Rabbi Akiva says, love your neighbor as yourself. Ben Azai says, no, there's another statement. This is the book of the creation of all humanity. Every human being is created in the image of God. Genesis chapter 5, verse 1. And the rabbis discussed it, and they said the latter opinion is the true one, because the first one says, love your neighbor as yourself, those who are like you. And every human being is created in the image of God, so we have to accept difference. Rabbi Nachman said, in Hebrew it says, love your neighbor as yourself. The word rea, neighbor, can be looked at the two letters. Resh ayin means ra. Love the evil within yourself. Not just love the shadow, the darkness, accept the whole, the totality. Unless you do that, you project the split. I am good, you are bad, the other, right? We have the other within ourselves. If we have compassion and on ourselves, we can have compassion for others. We integrate it. We don't repress it and deny it. So that's a very powerful idea. The whole problem in the world today is this splitting. I am good, you're bad. we should abolish religion in that way. The rabbis, the priests, who say mine is right. I do a lot of interfaith work recently, and we come together. Last week we had the art of peacemaking at my school, where Muslims, Jews, Christians. That's, quote, the new religion, in the sense the acknowledgement that all traditions say, in, quote, the Messianic era, we'll all realize we're all one. The lion will lie with the lamb, etc. We'll all come to the realization that we're in a space of mystery and have gratitude toward the creation and what we do have rather than what we don't have. And we realize that it's all about the uniqueness that we bring to the world so that we could help heal it. And we have to begin by healing ourselves and not splitting and not saying, I'm so awful because I didn't find perfection or ultimate fulfillment. That's an illusion. What did you find? I found Adam. I found, what's your name again? Katie and Andrew. And we're all together here, all knowing nothing, struggling to find something a little bit more than we know today.
My takeaway from that is, as a friend, as a father, as a partner, as a healer, as a human, right? One of the best things I can do in relationship to the other is allow that person to unfold as is unique to that individual and not stifle that experience
right.
based on my constricted, narrow sense of what the world is.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And that's loving. Now, if that individual's pursuit is interfering with me, that's a different thing. But to honor that uniqueness, right?
Mm-hmm.
I really embrace that you may do something that I don't want to do. And I love you anyways.
Mm-hmm. Right. To accept difference. In other words, I may disagree with you, but I still see the image of God within you. I hear you. And each person's different opinion actually contributes to the whole. In the Hebrew language, the word for truth is emet. Emet is the first letter of the alphabet, the last letter of the alphabet, and the middle letter of the alphabet. It's a vast perception of the universe. The word for falsehood is sheker, which is each letter follows the other. Kufshin Resh, it's a narrow perspective. So we have to expand through every human being contributing something. There's 70 faces in the Torah, 600,000 meanings in the Torah. When you mentioned rabbis, there's some good rabbis too who look at the world in this way. You understand that the narrow vision is just comes from fear, restriction. So we have to help them too, and we can't project our hatred on them. We have to help them see it and say we could be angry at it because we feel it's not right. It's reducing the humanity of the world. But the way, if we just get angry at them, we're not going to heal them. We have to be open. We have to be conscious of our anger. Why am I angry? Just because he doesn't agree with me, because he or she sees the world differently. I'm not God, So he has a right to that. But let's, through the dialogue, see if he could expand his vision and I could expand my vision, or be even more certain about my original perception based on the dialogue.
Learning and bringing light. And I want to conclude with this. I said every time I've spoken with you, I come out calmer. We don't need a neurofeedback machine. I can just talk to you. And it's a grounding experience and wonderful. And I just want to ask you one more thing. If people want to reach you, if somebody wants to meet with you or have a discussion with you, what is the best way to reach you?
Well, you could reach me through email or through, I don't want to give out my phone number.
Email's
publicly.
fine.
Yeah. It's melgottlieb9@gmail.com.
MELGOTTLIEB,
numerical 9.
Number 9 at gmail.com. melgottlieb9@gmail.com.
And sometimes I give classes. Sometimes I just do therapy or whatever. But I'm really busy running a school, so that's only a part of what I do.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I was very meaningful. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
This podcast is for general information and entertainment purposes only. This should not be considered treatment advice, nor is it a substitute for an individual treatment plan. If you have questions or concerns about your individual situation, it is strongly recommended you consult a licensed professional to talk about things that are specific to you. If there's an emergency, it is strongly recommended you seek treatment at your nearest emergency room.